I love when a show starts with a laugh. Welcome to Locked On Chiefs, folks. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Matt Derrick is here like he is every week. How are you, Matt?
Doing well, thank you.
Good. I am glad to hear it. We are going to talk about a number of things. The guy that's blasting the offensive line, what I should be worried about, what is the silliest thing I think has happened this week, and a number of things right here on Locked On Chiefs.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Mr. Matt Derrick from ChiefsDigest.com, how are you?
Mr. Ryan Tracy, I am doing quite well, thank you.
It's going to be fun, and I think you need a little downtime. It's been interesting weather out there too, right?
Very interesting. If it's not been excruciatingly hot, it's been pretty wet. So, I mean, we've had everything a little bit in between. We had a lot of wind on Tuesday. I think if Harrison Butker, bless his heart, had decided to turn around and kick field goals the opposite direction, he could have been making them from 75 yards instead of trying to pound them all the way from 48. But hey, that's training camp, man.
Better to fight uphill, right? Well, I hope it gets it all out of its system so that when I get there next week, things will be calm and cool, maybe. We'll cross our fingers. Yeah. There's been a lot of upshot, and later in the show, I'm going to get to some of the silly aspects of it. But clearly, the last 2 days, I think, has been a lot made of just how dominant the defense, especially on the edge, has come out. And I think there's some panic going on in the kingdom right now about this revamped offensive line. Can you set us at ease? What did you see in those particular, not just the one-on-ones, but in team in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it's been to me a little bit of, two storylines. I mean, one, the one-on-ones, everything you've been hearing, and because I see it on social media, and I see everything too, and I hear some of the discussion even in the tent. I think a little bit of it's overblown, and we could have a whole podcast conversation about one-on-ones and what you should be taking from them, and maybe most importantly, what you should not be taking from them. Okay. But I mean, two storylines for me is one is that unless there's just something dramatically wrong, Chris Jones is really, really good at going after the quarterback. I mean, maybe it's just that, hey, Orlando Brown and Lucas Niang, maybe they are as bad as you're hearing or something. And maybe they're just meeting your worst expectations. I think it's more likely that Chris Jones is really good at football because he's having a great camp. I mean, even the one-on-ones, team drills, doesn't matter. I mean, Chris Jones is making plays. I mean, the only time that in this move to the edge that he looks a little bit out of place is, the rare occasions when he's dropping back into coverage and practicing some of those, looks and everything. I think you probably hope that doesn't happen too often that Chris Jones gets forced to drop back into coverage. But otherwise, yeah, he's been pretty dominant. But on the offensive line, I mean, I think they're coming along. And specifically, I know with Brown and Niang, Niang has got some work to do. I mean, I think everybody knows that. I mean, he's all intents and purposes a rookie coming off of an opt-out year. And, and wasn't necessarily expected to be in this position pushing for that right tackle job so early. But the injury to Mike Remmers is putting him in there. He's getting a lot of valuable snaps. We've got a long time before the beginning of the season. I can't tell you right now who's going to be that right tackle. I mean, it could be Lucas Niang. It could be Mike Remmers. I think it'll probably be one of those two guys. But I think it's way too early in that fight, and there's a lot more football to be played. So that is to be continued. And as far as Orlando Brown, we got a chance to talk to him on Tuesday. And, I think that, to me, one of the things that's true about Orlando Brown is that you've watched him in Baltimore. And you know what? It's not always pretty, but he's always been effective. And I think that's pretty much what we're seeing here. And I even asked him, if, there was a different switch for him, when it comes to even just going up against your teammates in practice, and a different switch for when you're in a game situation against an opponent. And he even addressed it and saying, I don't want to call myself a gamer because I don't like that word. But then he went on to describe exactly what we usually talk about with a gamer. That, when the lights come on and the scene's big, that's when, he flips it on. So I honestly have almost no concerns about Orlando Brown. I mean, we'll see how he fits in. And, there's still some work to be done just as far as chemistry wise and picking up the offense and the terminology and getting some of the things down that Andy Heck wants that line to do and wants Brown to do specifically. But I'm not too worried about him. I think he's going to get it all figured out, and I think the Chiefs are going to get that figured out.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with you, and I don't see gamer as a negative word. Do you?
No, I always thought myself as a bit of a gamer because I hated practice. And I know when I played baseball, they clocked me once. I was like 25% faster running to first base in a game than I was in practice. I just hated practice. I mean, to me, I hated running. So, but hey, games on the line, I run a lot faster when there's something matters. So, especially if I'm going after dinner. So,
well, that's what it comes down to, right? It is about the motivation. And folks, if you don't follow what we're talking about, it is this concept that when the lights come on, when the whistle blows and it's real, you step your game up. And it's been that way for me in everything that I've ever done, whether it's sports, whether it's being on stage with a band, whether it's podcasting. It's about the performance. And I think that some of the best players that we've ever seen have been that gamer type, that it's okay to languish through practice, but when it's real, it's got to be on.
Yeah. And that's where, and I think Orlando Brown is one of these guys. You get that separate group. I mean, it's not saying that Orlando Brown's not going 100% in practice. I mean, pretty much everybody's going 100% in practice. The question is, are you one of those guys that when, the adrenaline's pumping, has that extra gear? And, a guy like Chris Jones has it. I mean, Patrick Mahomes clearly has that. Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, these guys all have that. I think Orlando Brown's that guy too. So that's why I'm not particularly worried. And, and specifically, you've probably been hearing about one-on-one drills and maybe he hasn't been, performing great. He says he's been working on some things in those drills. Specifically, it's not about the drill. It's about him getting better, and that he's been trying to work on specific things, whether it's be hand placement or footwork or anything like that. When you're working on something and somebody else is working on something entirely different, yeah, there's going to look like there's mismatches. But, at this point, there's nobody in Chiefs land disappointed in Orlando Brown Jr. behind the scenes. I mean, I think everybody at this point is pretty happy. And I think they're really eager to see what he's got on the field on Saturday.
I'm eager to see as well. And I have a number of concepts that I want. We'll play a game next time. You can either confirm or shoot me down on what I'm seeing, folks. We're going to get to that coming up next after we tell you about some of our pals. Now, the whole gamer thing, I'm sorry we got sidetracked. I think that word is a positive because I want to think that an elite athlete has the ability to raise their game. So I want to give you a series of questions, and you just tell me whether I'm stupid or if I'm hitting somewhere where it needs to be. And one of them is the thing that I notice about when Orlando Brown has been losing some, whether it's one-on-ones or teams or whatever, it seems to be something initial in the snap. And the thing that I'm really happy with is when I watch his feet, he recovers. And I think that's the adjustment to the offense. Am I wrong?
I don't think you are. I mean, I think you're dead on right there. I mean, Orlando Brown's a different type of tackle. I mean, even Eric Fisher was a big guy, but Orlando Brown's a really big guy. And, and that's one of the things. I mean, there's going to be times that Orlando Brown's going to get beat because there's going to be smaller guys who are maybe a little bit faster, a little bit quicker, can get a little bit of leverage on him. I mean, if the low man always wins, technically Orlando Brown should never win because he's never going to be getting lower than anybody else, which is why he's got to do things a little bit differently. And I think you see that. I mean, I think that he's kind of fitting in a little bit of what he does and adapting it to what Andy Heck wants him to do, some of the techniques that they're trying to get him to use. I mean, I think he's probably, using a little bit more punches than maybe he's used to. I mean, that's something that, Andy Heck's really big on, and he's got a different style. I mean, you look at a Creed Humphrey and a Trey Smith, those guys have a different style. I mean, they're also different positions than Orlando Brown. It doesn't mean that Orlando's approach is bad because he's different than those guys. It just means that it's different. And hey, the Chiefs are going to be results oriented. They're not going to worry too much about how Orlando Brown looks if the results are there. And so far in the past, short sample size at left tackle, but the results have been there.
Okay. Then I'm good. Not worrying about it. I'm fine with that. On the opposite side, and we got to talk about Chris because I let too many things slide about Chris, one in particular. I think that this Remmer situation is fine. I am not concerned about it. I know people are worried about Lucas Niang and his development. I think this is the best thing for his development, and it seems to be like he's making progress just since the pads came on. How do you see him?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, Lucas Niang definitely has been improving every step of the way. I mean, through OTAs during the summer to now, I mean, there's been definite improvement, and you hear that across the board. And, hey, on offensively, I mean, if you end up in a situation where you are playing three rookies in a spot like that, I mean, clearly the Chiefs are going to try and scheme their way to help make sure that, Niang is in the best positions that he can possibly be. Not going to leave him out there alone on an island. I mean, to a good degree, that's why you make the move for Orlando Brown, because you're going to put him in a lot more difficult situations than you will, frankly, whomever is on the right side. But yeah, we will see. I'll be really interested to see how that position shakes out. I kind of get the sense that, we may see Mike Rimmers back in action after the preseason game. And if that's the case, I mean, that's plenty of time still for a camp competition between those two guys. But these reps that Niang has been getting, that's not wasted time. I mean, he's needed the work. And, and the Chiefs have probably a couple of these spots of blessings in disguise where maybe some young guys have gotten a lot more reps than you would have expected. And that's going to pay off in the long run, regardless of who ends up winning that job.
Yeah, I think so as well. Now, on Chris Jones, the thing that has stood out to me is it looks like, yes, he's making the transition. He's being productive. That's fine. But it looks like he's changed not only his weight, but his body type as well. I see more bend out of him. Am I seeing things, or is he easily going around the edge with more bend than we expected?
Yeah, I think he is. I mean, and he talked about that a little bit last week when we got a chance to talk about, Pilates and yoga and things that he was doing during the offseason to improve his flexibility. I think that was really, an astute move on Jones's part to realize and to look at his game and say, you know what, if I'm going to play on the edge a little bit more, I've got to have some bend. I've got to be able to be a little bit more flexible than in the past. And you definitely see that. And you can definitely see it in his moves. I mean, he's definitely able to bend around the edge in ways that I don't think that he was in the past. And at the same time, he still has everything else. I mean, the swim move, spin. I mean, it's still Chris Jones out there. I don't think he's lost a whole lot of power. Certainly doesn't look like that because, we've also seen him kick inside and still be able to do some of the bull rush things and the things that he does on the 3-tech there. So I'm really impressed the fact that he seems to have been able to add that, like you said, that flexibility and that bend without sacrificing a lot of his power.
That's going to be key for him because in the end, he's going to use that. That's what he does. On the opposite side, been a quiet camp for Frank Clark for a number of different reasons. But beyond that, it seems like we're seeing a little bit of a surge. I felt going into the season before the Okafor acquisition that it was going to be Dana and Charlton being the second-tier guys. Now, I don't know if that's going to end up happening because of Alex's injury, but how does Dana in particular look to you, and what's going on with Taco Charlton?
Yeah, Dana, I think has been really, interesting, especially some of the ways that they've been using him. He's a guy that haven't actually been afraid to move inside. I mean, and that was, a little bit of a question when he was drafted last year, because the Chiefs did draft him to play on the edge more. And he moved inside, remember, at Michigan, and wasn't real successful that last year in Michigan, numbers-wise. And didn't necessarily seem real happy. I mean, I think he seems like a guy who's happier on the edge. But we've seen some looks that maybe is more in that NASCAR package look where you see Dana out there with Jones and Clark and moving some guys around in some different spots. And then once again, that's some of the unpredictability and flexibility that they're hoping to get out of having Jones out there. But Dana been really impressed. I mean, I think he seems like he has really progressed his game. He's picked up a few different things. The Chiefs are clearly, feel like that they can put him into, some different situations. Charlton and Okafor are both there in that mix. So, I think that's a really deep group that they have, because then you add in Joshua Kando, whom I think at this point, barring injury, I mean, he could be a redshirt guy. I mean, a guy that you just doesn't maybe see a lot of action, or is, specifically in some niche packages, or an injury guy who can come in when they need some help. But right now, I mean, if that's the group that they stick with, I mean, I think that's a pretty deep group, because they have overall, I thought, looked pretty solid and productive so far.
That's a good point you make. If Kando does make it to the practice squad because of the volume in front of him, he's a guy they got to protect every week if the rules are the same as we saw last season, right?
Yeah, I'm not putting him even in the practice squad category yet. I mean, I always assume that unless something goes really, really poorly, teams are going to keep most of their draft picks on the roster rather than risk them. And and really the question, even though I put him in that kind of redshirt category, it's not that he's not going to be able to see some time, but maybe he is somebody who is inactive on some weeks, won't play all 16 games. Maybe isn't quite there yet, and that's not maybe as much as a knock on Kando as much as the fact that Chiefs have a lot of experience at that position.
It's a big plus. I'm glad that they do, actually, because attrition is a bear. There's a couple of other questions, something a little bit silly that I get asked a lot that I want to ask you and put you on the spot for. We'll do that coming up next, folks. So there's all kinds of craziness. I'm not going to address the Trey Lance comparisons to Patrick Mahomes. That just makes me chuckle too much. So, and obviously it gets you as well.
Making me kind of chuckle too.
But one guy that Steve Spagnuolo kind of singled out in his press today was Colin Saunders. And it always comes up because I was really intrigued, and I'm proud of the guy for making the adjustment for playing linebacker in week 17 last year. But I always get the question, can he just move and do that? And the answer is no, unequivocally, that he is not a linebacker, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
So
not at that dude's size. No.
Right. But it's interesting that Spags mentioned him, and I'm eager to see where he is. How does he look to you at this point, going to preseason game 1?
Yeah, really interesting because Colin's one of those guys that I, from a distance to a degree, is really hard to evaluate because he always looks big. I mean, even if he's not big, Colin Saunders looks big. And and he's looked big. I mean, during the offseason and the training camp, but then you watch him on the field and you're like, that's just fast for a guy that's big. Because and we definitely saw it in the position drills and some of the one-on-ones as training camp really got going. He's had a lot of success. And and Spags was talking about the fact that at first they weren't seeing a lot of that transfer into the team periods, but we're seeing it more in team periods. He's getting a little bit more work as kind of in that sub package for the one defense. So I think he's really put himself into that spot. I mean, he's sometimes rotating in ahead of some other guys, but between Nnadi, Reed, Wharton, Saunders, I mean, that's a pretty solid rotation that they've got there. I am interested to see where he's at right now development wise, because so far on the field, I mean, we have seen him be really disruptive at times, and especially in those drills. I mean, like I said, it hasn't always been in the team periods, although he does seem like he has come on of late. But he shows that burst and that occasional ability to just absolutely wreck through offensive line that we saw in the college tape and hadn't always seen it at this level. But I think he's starting to show it.
That brings me, burst is a good question. Derek Nnadi looks smaller to me. He looks trimmer, and I'm wondering if that's translating to a little more burst out of him as well.
I think it is. I mean, it's interesting to see a little bit of what Nnadi's role is going to be this year. Because obviously, I mean, I think that his spot on the defensive line, honestly, is going to be the guy that's going to be trying to just eat up some blocks, to free up other guys to make plays. Because Reed can be a really disruptive player inside, and they want to be able to try and free him up as much as they can. They've got other guys that they want to free up too, and that really means Nnadi, this could be his best year of his career, and his numbers not look like it, just because that's what they're going to ask him to do. And you're right, I do think that he does look a little bit slimmer. I think that's probably something that he has been working on a little bit, because it definitely seems like it shows. But he's also just been, I think, really consistent out there. I mean, he's had some really good moments here at times, but I haven't seen a lot of negative plays. There hasn't been a lot of times that you're just putting a minus next to his name. I think he's looked pretty good so far.
Well, and I think he has to take advantage of it, because you're right about Reed. I think he changes the whole defensive front and the way they have to try to block them. But if he's lined up between Reed and Jones, he's got to be able to beat a one-on-one. And that, to me, is what it comes down to, because they're going to drift towards Reed eventually, right? Do you think right now that he's a better pass rusher than he was last season?
He might be. I mean, and the toughest thing for him is that, honestly, I think he's going up competition-wise on an offensive line that might be better than a lot of line competition he faces this year. And that's probably going to be to his advantage, because this is a huge compliment to Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith. And it's how good those guys have been. And you can throw in Joe Tooney there, obviously, of course, too. But that entire trio has just been so good and is so strong that, I mean, there's going to be plenty of times that I think Derek Nnadi is going to, face competition and face, matchups that are not as tough as the ones he faces in practice. But I think, and to his credit, I mean, I think he's held his own there. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if the production's going to be there for him, because I think that he's going to be the guy that's going to have to do some of the dirty work in there. Mm-hmm. But if he does get some of those one-on-one matchups, yeah, I think he's in a better position to win those than he has been in the past.
I agree, and I'm hopeful for it. My last question for you is real simple, and it's not position specific or player specific, but we've seen this rotation. We've seen them, I feel, be undermanned in the secondary in general. And then there's this question on Thornhill. Is he all the way back? Is he playing hesitant? Like, how is this going? As a secondary, as a whole, whether it's nickel or dime, 5 or 6 DBs, do you think that they are on par with last season in terms of their ability to cover and possibly make takeaways? Or do you think that they're still playing catch up?
I think this is going to be a better secondary than it was last year. Yeah. I think they're a little bit deeper. Devin Key's a really interesting addition. I don't know if he's going to make the roster or not, but having a guy like that can come in and push a little bit, even a guy like Armani Watts or Will Parks. I mean, I think that's just speaks to a little bit of the volume. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 of those guys that I just mentioned that don't make this team. And I think that speaks a little bit to just how deep of a unit this is. Thornhill, I've been seeing him get more and more comfortable as this camp has gone on. You could see when he had the groin injury last week, there was a lot of frustration there, obviously. But since then, he's come back. I feel like that he's been running full out. I don't think he's been hesitant. I think that the Chiefs are clearly still backing off of him a little bit, just lessening his workload. Not putting him up against the ones as much on the offensive side. He's been working a little bit with the twos, but he was mixing in. I mean, there's clearly Thornhill will be in there and they're some of their dime packages for sure. And I still get the sense that I would not be surprised if he was the starter in week 1. I mean, I think we're far enough away that could still happen. They just want to take a little bit of the workload off. But I'll tell you what, I mean, corner might be a really surprisingly, deep competitive group there. Clearly Ward and Sneed are going to be the top 2 corners. Sneed will kick inside whenever they go to a substitution package. Question's going to be, who comes in next. I mean, Fenton and Hughes are in the competition right now. They're battling back and forth. I mean, I think between those two, and the fact that Fenton can also play the nickel, I think really appeals to them. Question is going to be how many corners can they keep, because then you go down to DeAndre Baker and Bo Pete Keys, and honestly both those guys are having pretty good camps. Bo Pete Keys had interceptions both the last couple of days. He's looked really good, and then there's some guys on down that Chris Lammons was getting time on this roster last year. That's a tough battle for him. I mean, could still be a practice squad guy, but I think that, again, I mean, and Bo Pete was a guy that didn't see a lot of time on defense last year, even though he was on the roster. He's going to see time this year because he's better. And I think they clearly have 5-6 corners. I think that they would be comfortable playing right now. And that team hasn't always been there in the last few years.
I'm really encouraged by that. And I think we'll get a little bit more as we get closer to the first preseason game. We'll check back in with you. But Matt, thanks for being here today.
Always a blast, Ryan. Thank you very much.
Folks, ChiefsDigest.com. I almost made you official there. That was kind of fun. I'm glad you guys are here to watch. Thanks for listening today, watching today on YouTube or all the platforms. We'll be back with you tomorrow, and we'll talk to you then.